to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
Well, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. My name's Tom Dutta, and I am the Quiet Warrior, and I'm excited to have on my show today Mr. Michael Law. Michael, hey, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, Michael. And, the miracle of technology, you're down in Idaho, I believe, and I'm up here in Vancouver, British Columbia. So we have a beautiful sunny day up here in the fall. And I believe I have the moniker of being your second favorite Canadian.
Yes. Unfortunately, you're not number one, simply because I've got a daughter-in-law who, of course, is number one.
Well, that's understandable. Anytime I can make a list and be in the top two, I'm pretty happy. Hey, so Michael, let's get right to it. This show's about you, sir. So why don't you tell me about yourself?
Well, I was born and raised here in Idaho. I grew up with plenty of chores to do with animals, and especially as I got older, was milking cows and feeding cows and doing plenty of work on the farm. So I grew up in an environment where hard work was expected, and I definitely learned the quality of hard work as I was growing up. And I've lived here in Idaho most of my life. I have lived elsewhere. Spent a couple of years in Florida as a Japanese tour guide. My wife is Japanese, and I actually lived in Japan for a while, and that's where I met her. And spent a couple of years as a Japanese tour guide. But that's not the only thing that I've done. I have done a wide variety of things, from driving taxi to when I was first married, started driving as a pizza delivery guy at Domino's Pizza, and then moved into management, and I've been in various management positions really ever since, including the job that I'm doing now, which is a project manager for an online translation service.
Wow. I mean, what a diverse background you have, Michael. And, I my mind, before I tell the audience more about you, which I want to do, my mind went in a couple directions. You know that the way our interview is, this is a journey of a conversation. So the first one was Japan. It's pretty neat. My daughter-in-law is Japanese, and their parents are in Tokyo. So I've learned a lot about that wonderful culture. And then you said something about cows. I remember watching a movie once, and there was a fun activity called cow tipping, and I spent some time in the insurance industry in a leadership role. And actually, a lot of farmers were buying insurance on their cows, and we used to do claims where cows would get disoriented and fall into big puddles during storms, and they couldn't get back up, and they would drown. So it's a very, very fascinating.
Yeah.
We could do a whole show on cows.
Yes, we could, actually. Which is why I'm not in the dairy business, because I spend too much time with them.
Yeah, I love that. So, Michael, I want to build you up a bit because you're authentic. That's why I have you on my show, and I want to tell the audience why we met. I mean, through your body of work, you've written a book called The Founders Revolution, The Forgotten History and Principles of the Declaration of Independence. And we met through that as fellow authors. And as I read the book, I thought it was brilliant. I'm looking at it now, and the cover is spectacular. And as a Canadian, after reading it, it made a big perspective on my thinking about America. So we'll get into that in a moment in your story. But a little bit more about your background, because it's notable. I mean, you've focused and dedicated your life to researching the founders and the founding principles, this whole era. You're a smart guy. You've got a bachelor's in political science from Boise State University and a master's degree in political science from American Public University, really focusing on U.S. history and government. So I find it already fascinating about why did you go into that field. And you've done appearances on Fox Radio and network stations as a political analyst. And so here we are. So let's get into your story. I mean, take us back and wherever you want to start, and tell us about what you've done, the backstory behind this work.
Really, it started when I was in high school. I did not actually do very well in government. So government was uh, a required class in government and U.S. government, and I actually failed that first semester.
Hmm.
And since then, I've had to fight and claw my way back to where I am now. But interestingly, when I was in that class, the first semester I failed. The second semester, and of course I had to make that first semester up. The second semester, we had mock legislatures, and mock trials and things like that to kind of give us some practical experience. And I was always kind of a quiet student in government class, especially. But I kind of, as the teacher said, I kind of blossomed when we did the mock legislature because our purpose was to act as if we were the legislature, and so we were to fight against bills that we didn't believe in, and fight for bills that we did believe in. And there was just some things that I was passionate about, and I took off and ran with it. And he was really surprised, and he asked me afterwards, have you ever thought about getting into government, getting into the legislature? And my immediate answer was no. But that may have very well, I think it really sparked the interest in government, in history, and it didn't just end there. So when I got into my bachelor's degree at Boise State, I had a professor there who I took one time, and I just absolutely fell in love with him and the way he, not just the way he taught, but what he was teaching, which was political thought. I was more interested in going into political science for the practical side. If I was a legislator, how would I do this? Or if I was a government worker, how would I do this? But he got me into political thought, and that is where I went from there. And my bachelor's, my master's, all really political thought and political thinking, and not really just political, just how should government work and so forth, like that. And that's really where I started. Had to fight and claw my way up.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I'm really interesting when I meet people about how they found their way. I call it onto the pathway. Sometimes we get on this unthinking treadmill, Michael, and sometimes we have mentors and people who tell us we should be placed in a certain job or profession. I'm fascinated, and I agree with you about the farmers and the hard work. And now it makes a lot more sense to me that going from that into this work is really part of a passion that you discovered, but through some mentorship. I also want to suggest that I want to honor you for your vulnerability of talking about how you failure in school, because I think that's a teaching moment. Some might say that many politicians today are still failing in their work, so you're not alone.
Very much so.
Yeah, we could have another show on that one too. But let's get into a question about the book. Now, I'm holding it again here, and the reason why I say that is there's something about this book that is astonishing, and I want to recommend it highly. I don't usually plug books, but I also want to bring in a quick anecdote story here that my wife and I were recently down in Victoria, British Columbia. I live on the mainland in Vancouver. It's about a 90-minute ferry ride. And our Capitol buildings that's our government buildings, are spectacular buildings. Victoria also has a ferry that goes over to Washington State. And I put your book actually on a monument. It was a war monument that's in the front of our Parliament buildings. And we watched the book, and within less than a half an hour, somebody took it. But, it's a great, great book and a great cover. And what's in it is even more important. So let's ask you a question. Why is the Declaration of Independence, Michael, important to learn? And does it matter to other countries?
Yeah, very much so. It is important not only for the U.S., simply because that's where the U.S. got to start, but it's important to all countries, simply because of the principles that are taught really within the Declaration of Independence. We know that all men are created equal. That is highly important to the whole world. Imagine how the world would be if everybody believed that everybody else was they're equal, that all men are equal.
Yeah.
And it really started with the U.S. I mean, if we go back and look, and I actually do this in my book, go back and look at how we got to how America, the U.S. got to that point. If we look at the history of the world, it's always been tyrants and dictators, kings, whatever it might be, or a very small group of people ruling the countries throughout the world. And if it wasn't, all the way up until the United States declared their independence and then come up with their constitution, it was always a rule by an individual or by a few, instead of being a representative government where people have the voice and people have really the ultimate power. And so this is just the Declaration really was the beginning of that. And there are so many countries that have actually put forth their own declarations of independence, as well as other declarations, including, and you can even look at the UN, they also have a declaration of rights. And that is exactly what the Declaration of Independence does, is declared individual rights and the importance of men being created equal and the purpose of government.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I have to say that the book is very well authored. That's a credit to you, Michael, but also it's well organized, and it's a reference book. I mean, I've read it and it sits on the shelf. What I want to do is read again off the cover. The byline says, the forgotten history and principles of the Declaration of Independence. And so that brings to mind the question, tell me what's been forgotten.
Oh, there's plenty forgotten. I mean, the principles and the history behind that declaration really has been forgotten. So what led up to that declaration, actually starting with the English Magna Carta, which declared certain rights. And then in 1689, there was an English Bill of Rights. And these rights were declared to British citizens, and the American colonies fell under those same rights. The king, however, did not seem to want to continue granting those rights. And in fact, if you look, when the colonists came to the U.S., it wasn't the U.S. at the time, when they came to the American continent, each one of those colonies had their own charter in which the king granted individual powers to those governments, legislative powers and so forth. And so with those granted powers, the people had the ability to choose their own government and so forth. But we have forgotten that the king was trampling the very rights that were declared under British law, Magna Carta and so forth. We have forgotten that. We've forgotten how we got to that point, and that is something that I found important that we remember. Because if we lose our foundation, you tend to lose everything. The whole house comes down.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. My mind went in another direction when you were talking there, and the word motive comes to mind. We'll get to that in a minute. But I in the body of work and the work that I do myself in leadership, I always look below the tip of the iceberg at motive. What drives leadership's behaviors or what drives government's behaviors. It's really what's the motivation. But I want to go back to the book again. I'm turning it over here in the back cover. It's a kind of a cool quote at the top by Abraham Lincoln. It says, "Let me entreat you to come back to the truths that are in the Declaration of Independence." And then in large print, it says, "Has America strayed from the principles of the founders?" And so tell me, are we too far off the principles? And in your opinion, what has to happen to move back to those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is important that we move back, and we have strayed a long ways. And I can give you, and I do give many examples within my book. So the most recognized and most known one to U.S. students in high school and really anywhere is taxation without representation. That was one of the ways that the king was violating, because every colony had its own charter, which granted them power to tax, granted them power to make laws, and so forth. And so those were their legislative bodies. Those were their representative bodies. But the king actually started putting Parliament more and more in charge, and they had no representation there. So taxation without representation. But that was just one of 27 different charges against the king, how he was violating their rights as British citizens. Some of these others were if there was a crime committed, whether it was by British soldiers or others, or even themselves, they had forced venue change. So they were a lot of times sent to England for their trials. And that was very, very inconvenient. And so there was that charge. One of my favorite charges is one that says he, meaning King George III, has erected a multitude of offices and sent hither officers to harass our citizens and eat out our substance. And one of the examples that I provide there, and there's actually multiple examples that I provide, but the most stark one is that of the IRS. Great, paying taxes. So of course, we have representation now, but it's taxes. And just to comply, the IRS, according to the IRS website, just to comply with the U.S. tax code, it costs every citizen and business 6.1 billion hours. That's billion with a B. 6.1 billion hours just to comply. And that is a massive amount of regulation and time and effort that is just wasted.
Wow. I mean, you just blow my mind. That's a big number. And in fact, I just thought of something that when I was in an executive role once, I was with a company in Canada that had an American parent company. And that was right about the time that Sarbanes-Oxley came into play. And, I don't want to make the show about this, but my understanding is Sarbanes and Oxley were two senators or two government leaders, and they passed this law, which required a whole bunch of bureaucratic paperwork and administration. And I remember our company had to hire more people, and we spent so much time just complying with this Sarbanes-Oxley law. It's just unbelievable that $6 billion in time and effort just to comply with a tax code. There's got to be a better way. So, Michael, I want to throw something out to you now that's maybe a bit controversial, but let me just give you some context around it. Is there anything in here in the Declaration of Independence or the principles about love and respect for your fellow human being? The reason why I ask that is we've witnessed, and I'm a Canadian, but I have American friends, and we are connected to the fabric of your country through relationships. But I mean, we see discussions and debates on TV. We hear a tone that sometimes is not a very positive tone. It's an attacking kind of tone. There's not a lot of harmony, and I see government leaders trying to resolve problems, and it seems like there's just this love and respect has been forgotten. Can you just comment about that?
Oh, absolutely. There's plenty in the Declaration itself. One of them I've already mentioned, which is all men are created equal. If we recognize that every individual, no matter who they are, was your equal, that would make a world of difference. But another part, which is towards the end, they talk about their reconciliation attempts with England. So they did not want to start a war. They did not want to have to fight with guns and so forth with Britain in order to retain their rights as British citizens. They did everything they could beforehand to avoid the war, and then even after the war had actually started and lives had been lost on both sides, they still sent an olive branch petition to the king in hopes to end the war and have peace. Even after, of course, the king, being the tyrant that he was, he didn't even look at the petition and just simply rejected it and declared that America was in rebellion continued with the war. But even after the war was started, they sent an olive branch petition. Not only that, but if we look at the Constitution itself, it was a bunch of individuals, the founders, who had come together to create a new government, and everybody wanted certain things, but they all listened to each other, they talked with each other, argued with each other, and then compromised to get where we are. If politicians would understand that we need to listen to the other side, and of course, give your own opinions, but listen to the other side and come up with the right answer. George Washington was well known for this. He didn't actually say very much, not only in the convention, but even as president, because he would listen to every argument by every individual, and then based on what he heard and including his own opinions in that, he would come up with what he believed was the best decision. And that's what we saw with the founders in creating the Constitution, was compromise. They would listen, they would talk, yes, they would argue, but then they would come together and decide this is what's the best course for the country. And if politicians did that, it would be a world of difference.
I totally agree. And thanks, Michael. I mean, I'm fascinated by that. It's interesting in the work I do. I focus on four motives. I mentioned earlier in the interview, I'd get to this later, but I just want to bring this up for context, that it's so great to be, or refreshing to know, that the founding principles were really focused on the motive of peace and harmony. And the two motives I'm going to mention are motive of power and the motive of peace. And I think we'll name this episode of the show something around that. And what I've learned is that motives, leaders who lead countries, lead people in corporate America where I've worked, a lot of times the teams and what happens in those organizations or countries comes right from the top leaderships, the motive by the leader. And so when you put a leader in power, there's lots of examples in history, like Gandhi drove out the British Empire from India with the motive of peace. But if you had Gandhi, who had maybe the motive of power, you might have seen a lot more bloodshed. You might have seen a very different outcome. And so I think it's great to see the founding principles. Seems to me that sometimes we're focused more on power, getting things done, and maybe disharmony. And I really hope that with the work you're doing and this kind of discussion, that we can teach leaders to get more back to that motive of peace, which is a position of strength, in my opinion. Want to do this, Michael, before we go to wrapping up, and I want to honor you with a few words. So as you're talking, I write these down. They're not scripted. They're from my heart about who you are, what you say. And the first word, these are leadership words, is maven. You are a maven. A maven is somebody who has a whole encyclopedia in them of information, and they're a go-to person for a certain topic. That's you. You're a thought leader. I mean, the world needs more people who can express ideas in a certain niche. I hear a lot of voice of reason from you, Michael, and it might be just because of who you are, but the voice of reason is definitely a motive of peace. And then the last one would be clarity and wisdom. I mean, I read this book, but even listening to you talk, man, it's awesome, and you're just so clear. So congratulations. And I want to turn it to you and ask you to tell us about how to get a hold of this book and connect to you about your body of work.
Sure. To get a hold of my book and to even get a hold of me, you can go to, first and foremost, michaellawauthor.com. There's plenty of information there, but it's available on Amazon. It's available in most bookstores, Barnes & Noble. You can get it on as an ebook, Amazon Kindle, or Barnes & Noble, Book Nook, and other venues like that. But if you want one that is signed, go to my website and purchase one there, and I will ship it, and all of them that are purchased through my website will be signed. You can get it, but you can get it anywhere.
Well, that's just awesome. And I know I've got mine. I recommend everybody read this great book. Get it from Connect to Michael. And, Michael, as you were wrapping up there, I have one more question I wanted to ask you that came to mind. And that is, I say this all the time, that people, it's my experience from my own journey in life, that people who wake up in the morning can love themselves first, can be in service to others. And when we love ourselves first, we usually make time to do things that we're passionate about. What do you wake up? What drives you in the morning, and what are you passionate about?
That's actually a good question. What I am most passionate about when I wake up is what can I do in the world? And when I think about that, in how to make the world a better place, what can I do in the world? It comes down to my family. First and foremost is family. What can I do to help my wife? What can I do to help my children, to nurture them, to help them to grow, to learn and progress? If every person in every country and in every part of the world focused on their family and what they can do to help them and what they can do to teach them and nurture them and help them to grow, the world would be a vastly different place, because that kind of an influence in the home, in families, when we teach about love, when we teach about those good principles, will rub off on the community, will rub off on states and nations and so forth. So it has to start with the family, and that's where when I wake up, that's where I start, is with the family.
Well, that's just awesome. And when I listen to this back again, I hear an uptick in your voice. It's absolutely awesome about your passion, Michael. Thank you for sharing it. And I want to just say to everybody that go find this show on iTunes, the Quiet Warrior Show. Give it a listen, give it a rating so we can honor Michael Law's great work. And again, his book, The Founders Revolution, The Forgotten History and Principles of the Declaration of Independence. Get that book, check it out, and keep it on your shelf as a reference. And so find that true passion like Michael did, live with that purpose you have, and live the life that you deserve and desire.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca